All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jessica Rieger. I'm the Director of Program Performance and Operations for CCR with the North Carolina Community College System Office. Today, Jennifer Bean and I have a wonderful presentation for you all on a new option that you'll have for use with students this program year. Brandy Brown is going to navigate the slides for us. And then we'll have the opportunity at the end for you all to ask questions. But alternate placement is a new option. We did have to put it into our North Carolina assessment manual and then have Octay approve it, which they just did a couple weeks ago. And so we have programmed Advances to be able to take alternate placement as an option for students. And then in the chat, you will see the updated CCR assessment manual that has more detail on alternate placement, as well as the form that you'll need to submit to the system office if you would like to use this. And then I've also uploaded to the chat a copy of the slide deck that we're going to go through today so that you have that as well. Next slide. Okay, so today we're going to give you an overview of alternate placement, some potential areas of use. We're going to talk about the state approval form, and then I'll show you how you go about recording alternate placement in Advances. And then we'll have time at the end if you have questions. Jen, Brandy, and myself will be available to answer any questions that you may have. Next slide. Okay, so this is effective for this program year. As of 7/1/24. However, due to the need of having to have prior approval before you use this at the local level, we're not going to allow providers to put in ServiceNow tickets to have student placement scores that have already been recorded removed from the profile so that you can reset it with alternate placement. So this is something that you can start using once you have approval from the system office to use it. And we'll talk about the different ways in which you might use it. But this is an option that Octay put out for this program year at the state's sole discretion. So not all states have adopted this. North Carolina decided to because we feel like it's a good opportunity for certain students that enter our programs. But what this does is it would exempt a student from needing to pre and post test if they are in very specific programs that are designed to yield an MSG that is not 1A. 1A is when you pre and post test a student for an EFL game. So we'll go over, as we get further into this presentation, some examples and areas in which this could be used. But if you do decide to adopt this and you do start using this, a student who does have an alternate placement for the program year would be removed from your post-test denominator when we calculate the state and provider's post-test rate. So as you all are aware, you need to have 65% of all of your participants post-tested within a program year. But much like your ASE high students or those level 6 students that are in ASE, they're not going to be calculated into that 65% goal for the post-test rate. Next slide. So if you have run table 1, 4, 4A, or 4C or table 4 in Advances recently, you will notice that there are 2 new lines within those tables. And they say alternate ABE placement and then alternate ESL placement. So if you decided to use alternate placement in your program, when you give someone the initial placement of an alternate placement, they would show up on that line item of those tables as their placement for the program year. Next slide. Now, if you have a student who comes in and cannot place on an NRS assessment due to having a low pretest performance, this is not where you would use alternate placement. You would still use that NRS level 1 as that provisional entering EFL until the student is able to earn a valid pretest score. So if a student's out of range or if a student is unable to score on an NRS assessment, this is not where we would use alternate placement. And it's only going to be used where students are seeking an MSG that's not that pre-post test EFL gain, which is MSG 1A. Next slide. So now we're going to look at some areas, and we've come up with about 4 where this could possibly be used. Again, providers are not required to use alternate placement, but it is an option if you would like to submit the alternate placement form, have the state review it and approve it. But one place where we thought that this might be helpful is with students who come in that are HSE or MPHSE diploma seeking students. So oftentimes we have students that will enter the program who have passed an official exam, and they can take the official practice test in the area that they still need to complete. So a lot of providers offer intense boot camps for subject areas with the intent of at the end of that boot camp, the students sit and hopefully pass that section of HiSET or GED. So if you were to use alternate placement with these students, their potential MSG would be 1D, which would be the passing of an HSE subtest, or depending on how many subtests they've already completed, they may be going for MSG2, which is the completion of their HSE diploma. So if you were to put in for approval to do this with your HSE and MPHSE students, then your documentation would be that you have a copy of an official HSE practice exam, so either the GED Ready or the HiSET official practice test in the master file, and the score is either too close to call, likely to pass, or if it's HiSET, then they put that as somewhat prepared, range, or higher. So that shows that, you know, more than likely the student's going to be with you a short time to do some intense review, sit for that subtest, and hopefully pass that subtest. And that may or may not lead to the completion of their HSE diploma, but you would at least get MSG 1D. Next slide. Another area where we felt like this may be helpful is with your HSE diploma seeking students who are wanting to do the prep and the official exams in Spanish. Right now, we do not have an NRS assessment that can really gauge anything with the Spanish, language that we can officially record for NRS placement. So again, these students, their potential MSG would be 1D or 2. So they're either going to pass a subtest or complete the entire HSE diploma to earn either MSG 1D or 2. But then if you put in to have approval to use alternate placement for these students at your institution, then your documentation that you would keep on hand is the same as the previous slide. It would just be that the GED Ready or the HiSET official practice test would be in Spanish, but the score would still be the same of too close to call or likely to pass range. Next slide. Okay. Another area with which you can use this is with your students who come in and they are wanting to enter post-secondary. And I do have a note on here that you want to use this with caution, and I'll explain that more in a second. But this is for students who come into CCR and they intend to enroll in curriculum or Con Ed programs, and they're really just in need of an academic refresher. These students, their potential MSG would be 1C, which is the PSE MSG. So they enter into CCR first, and then after they have their CCR enrollment, they're either going to have a curriculum or a Con Ed enrollment that would then count for that post-secondary enrollment MSG. So if you were to submit the form to be able to offer this at your institution, what you would need as documentation is a copy of the student's official transcript demonstrating secondary education completion. So like an unofficial copy of their high school diploma, or their adult high school diploma or what have you. And that's what you would keep in the master file. The key to this, and why I say use this with caution, is that it has to be with students who have never enrolled in or earned a curriculum credit. So if you think about your early college students, your CCP students, if you have those folks come to CCR, they've already got college credits on their transcript. So when we go to data match with the National Student Clearinghouse, those students are not going to earn the post-secondary enrollment because they already have a curriculum credit prior to CCR enrollment. So we can't give the PSE MSG for those students. So in that case, if you do have students who already have college credit on their transcripts, and it could be from 10 years ago, if they have any curriculum credits on their transcript that would be with National Student Clearinghouse, you're going to want to pre and post test those students for the EFL gain. But if you have students who are coming in, they just need a quick refresher, they've never earned a curriculum or Con Ed credit, this is an area with which you could use alternate placement. Next slide. All right, this is our last example, and probably, if I had to guess, one of the bigger areas that I think we'll see this used. Again, you have to submit the alternate placement approval form, which we'll look at in a minute, prior to being able to offer this for your students at your institution. But this would be for your students who are coming in wanting to earn MSGs 3 through 5. So your IET career pathway MSGs, your workplace literacy MSGs. So you do have to have a state approved career pathway or IET in place. And going forward, we're going to update that template to include a space that says if you would like to use alternate placement with that career pathway. But in order to capture the career pathways and IETs that have already been approved by the state office, we have the alternate placement approval form. And so the way that you would document this is that the student's IET workplace participation was documented in the student master file. So again, this would be for students that are coming in wanting to enter one of your career pathways or your IETs or your workplace literacy programs, and they're probably not going to be with you for a very long time, but their ability to earn MSGs 3 through 5 is such that you feel like it would be better to give them alternate placement as opposed to keeping them enough time to do a pre and a post test. Next slide. So again, providers are not required to exempt participants from pre and post test. You can continue to use assessment procedures that best meet the needs of your adult education program, but this is an option if you so choose. Next slide. So this is what the form looks like. It is in the new assessment manual, which is in the chat of the Zoom. We've put the revised manual in there because it did have to be approved by Octave. And again, this slide deck is also in the Zoom chat for you to download a copy of. But the form is pretty simple. We just need this first page submitted to the state office. You're going to put down your program's name, the director's name, the date that you're submitting it, and then you're going to select types 1 through 4 as which one you're submitting for approval. If you are submitting this for type 4, you want to submit a separate form for each alternate placement you're requesting. So let's say I have 5 career pathways that I'm currently using at my institution. I'm going to submit 5 alternate placement approval forms if I want to use alternate placement with all 5 of those career pathways. And we're doing that because each career pathway, IET, and workplace literacy program is so different and so unique. Even if it's plumbing at 5 different institutions, it can look 5 different ways. So we want to be sure that this is beneficial to you as a provider with your career pathways. So you would need to submit a separate form for each alternate placement that you are requesting. And if you'll go to the next slide, the second page of this form, which you don't have to turn back in, this is more of a descriptive for you, just to say, okay, if you're circling type 1 on that form, these are the students who would be eligible, and that you understand that this would be the required documentation for the students to have on hand for when you put alternate placement into advances. So that's your types 1 through 4 that we've gone through. And then there are some notes down there that the state office approval occurs on a case-by-case basis for each career pathway that is submitted for alternate placement consideration. Each proposed alternate placement assessment must be submitted separately and accompanied by an alternate placement approval form. And then proposed alternate placement assessments must be aligned with the objectives and outcomes of the affiliated career pathway program. Next slide. Okay. So this is how you would go about entering it into advances. So if you've submitted your form, the state office comes back and says, yes, we'll approve you to use alternate placement for this group of students. When you are going to put in the student record into advances, when you go to the enter test scores section of the student record, you will see that there is add alternative placement listed there. Next slide. When you click the alternate placement assessment button, you will select from the first 3 options, which would either be HSE, MPHSE, diploma seeking students, the HSE seeking Spanish students, or the career pathway IET workplace literacy. As you scroll down this list, you'll see that there are other options, but they're followed by provisional in parentheses. We do not want you to use the options that have provisional at the end. Only select from those 3 options at the top. And then again, the alternate placement students do not count in that post-test percentage rate. And then once you enter in this alternate placement for the student, you do need to go to your approvals pending to the assessment section and approve the alternate placement. So it works just like putting in an NRS assessment score. So keep that in mind too, that you will need to approve those alternate placements. Next slide. So the provisional EFL button allows for the selection of a numeric NRS level placement. So the new drop-down menu does contain a reason for the assignment of that provisional EFL. And if you've assigned provisional EFLs this program year, especially in the last couple of weeks, you've noticed that there is this new reason options that pops up. And so that's when you use the ones with provisional at the end. But you're saying this student is ABE level 3 when you use a provisional EFL. When you're using alternate placement, you're just saying, I'm going to put this student on the alternate placement line. So it's not assigning them an NRS level. Your provisional EFL students do count in that 65% post-test rate. All right. So I know that's a lot. I've had the chat open on the side, but I have not read through it yet. But we will look through those, and then also we'll give you the opportunity to unmute and ask questions as well. Let's see. Would a practice test in Essential Ed satisfy documentation of practice tests? It looks like Jen answered that one. It does need to be the official practice test from the vendor.
Just to kind of clarify my comments to Shannon, HiSET uses one of the publishers. I can't remember if it's Aztec, Essential Ed. One of the publishers hosts the official HiSET practice test. I need to go back to HiSET and check who hosts their official practice test. For GED, it does have to be the GED Ready because that's the official GED practice exam. But for HiSET, I need to check who hosts their computer-based official practice test. So I'll do some research and get back.
Okay. And I am adding the slide deck and the assessment manual back to the chat to see if that helps.
Yeah, I think I just got it to go through. So they should have the presentation and the alternative and the assessment manual now.
Let's see. If a form has not been submitted for alternate placement and the student passes an HSE test or enter PSC, will they still get the MSG without the form submission? So you can have students, it looks like Jen answered that one. If the student has entered your program with the traditional pre-test and they have 12 necessary hours to be counted as a participant, they would still get the MSG even if alternate placement is not submitted. How does this change the intake process for students? Typically, we pre-test and orient the student first. Should we be waiting on this until we discuss the goals with students? How will the 12-hour rule for assessments? Okay, so that's several things there. So for one, you are not required to adopt this. If the current processes that you have in place seem to be working and you don't want to change them, then you're not required to change them. Really, if your student already has a pre-test, then this may not be something that you want to adopt right now. It really depends on the structure of your program, how you're offering career pathways. Are you running HSE in Spanish? Are you running HSE boot camps? Are you running kind of refresher, academic refresher courses for students that are kind of like a boot camp idea? So it's really going to come down to, is this something that would fit into the programs that you currently offer? If you are offering a lot of career pathways, this might be something that would be beneficial to you, especially if you are bringing students into the career pathway and not really recruiting from within CCR. Once you give a student an NRS placement, though, that is their placement for the program year. So if you can't give the student the NRS assessment, record that, and then later give them alternate placement. Really, all the initial placement test does, or alternate placement as well, or even when we do the adult high school entering EFL, it tells us at the state where to start recording the student on the federal tables. All of the federal tables go by NRS levels. And so that initial placement really is just to say, this is the row where you'll find the student's data on the official federal tables. Now, that initial placement is also often the benchmark that we use to say the student needs to this level to make an EFL game. But in terms of initial placement, it just tells us where that student will wind up for the program year on the rows. So a student cannot have a pretest and an alternate placement. You do need to assign alternate placement within the first 12 hours of a student entering your program. So that's really where you kind of have to look at the programs that you're currently offering and see, is this something that makes sense for your program? And if it doesn't, then, it doesn't. But we can see where this would be beneficial to some, but we're by no means saying that this is something that everybody has to use. Nicole said, this sounds like an option for seniors who wish to take digital literacy. And it was like Jen just responded, unfortunately, we cannot use it with this population. Those students would not be eligible for any MSG outside of 1A. unless they're in an IET pursuing MSGs 3 through 5. We are trying really hard to find a good solution for this population. So that's the thing to keep in mind with alternate placement is you want to, at the forefront of your thoughts and your planning, identify the MSG with which students would get. Like, so with digital literacy, they really are only able to do a pre and post test gain. There's not an MSG that they earn through the completion of digital literacy. Although this is something that during the public comment period, we're hoping a lot of people, bring up and push that they really could use a different measure. So unless you have come up with an IET that focuses on digital literacy that would allow the student to earn MSGs 3 through 5 somehow, digital literacy is not going to be a good population to use this with. Is there a way to check National Clearinghouse to see if someone has a curriculum record, especially if they took a CU class elsewhere? So some schools have access to the National Student Clearinghouse, not all, but many do. You would want to check with your registrar to see if they have an NSC account, and if they do, they could check to see. If not, I don't know that there's a public records search, but hopefully a student would know if they had ever been in any kind of college credit class during high school or after high school. For the PSE MSG, what about prior Con Ed classes? So if they've been in the Con Ed classes that count for PSE, then that's the same rule. So they need to, if PSE MSG is the one that you want to go with and use alternate placement, they really need to not have any curriculum or Con Ed classes. We only match Con Ed with the system office reg reports, so it's not a national check, but it is still a check across the state. April said this would work for our short-term certification courses we have designed for students to prep to pass a specific certification exam, but are not with us long enough to progress test. Is this correct? Yes, that would be a good example, I would think. If they are in a career pathway IET. So again, you want to think, what is the MSG that at the end of the program my student is earning? So if those students that are in these short-term certification courses, if they're in a career pathway IET for that MSG 3 through 5, then yes, this would be a good place to use that. Megan said, so the form needs to be submitted for each student. No, it only needs to be submitted for the type 1 through 4 that you would like to offer. And then when it comes to career pathways, that's that type 4. If you are trying to submit alternate placement for a career pathway, we need one form per career pathway, but then you can apply it to all of the students going forward that are in that pathway. Oh, thank you, Karen. The institutional effectiveness often uses the clearinghouse as well. Nicole said, with the understanding that we will not get an MSG on a senior in a digital literacy class, is there anything wrong with still serving them, assigning a placement? I'm thinking it's the right thing to do, though we won't get an MSG. So if you've got seniors in a digital literacy class, you still need to give them an NRS assessment, because we cannot approve the use of alternate placement on digital literacy, since we know at the state level it's not going to result in an MSG. So they do need to take an NRS assessment upon entry into the CCR class for Title II compliance. To get PSE, they look for completed class with CU or CE, not just an account and colleague before CCR, right? They look at enrollment into a CU or CE, not necessarily passing completion. They're looking for, do they have an enrollment like on STAC? So STAC and colleague, is there an enrollment on STAC that was CU or CE? So if there's an enrollment into like English 111 on STAC, but then there's an X next to it, that means that was dropped. So that's not going to data match. But if you go in there and there's an English 111, whether they passed it, whether they got a WF for withdraw fail or a WD for the student withdrew, if there's anything other than an X next to it, then that we're not going to be able to give that PSC MSG. If students are pre-registered for a class, will that count them out? So the way that the data match works is that it's looking for CCR enrollment, the enrollment date into CCR to be before the enrollment date to curriculum or Con Ed. So if on September 1st, I'm in CCR and then I enroll into a plumbing class that starts on the 3rd of September, then that's fine because the CCR enrollment occurred prior to Con Ed enrollment.
Jess, I think Claudia Clayton's got her hand up.
Okay, Claudia.
Thank you. So this is about, let's say that we use alternative placement for HSC in Spanish, and students pass one of the sub-tests or all the tests. But later the student decide, yes, I want to continue improving my English as a second language. So for that, did I hear you correctly that the student couldn't have 2 different placement mechanisms, even though, I mean, we're talking about an instance for when that happens within the school year and within the 90-day, activity period?
And that's a great question. So that's kind of opposite of the first question. So if alternate placement is assigned first, so if the NRS assessment is assigned as the initial placement first, then there's no need to assign alternate placement within the program year because the initial placement is based on the NRS. Now, this is why this is a good example. If a student comes in and you put them on alternate placement, that's going to exclude them from being able to make the EFL gain from pre and post testing. But that doesn't mean that it excludes them for the whole program year, because if you have a student that earns an MSG through alternate placement, but then comes to do ESL, you can at any point in time, even if there's alternate placement on the student's record for the program year, at any point in time, if you want to give the student an NRS assessment, you can. And the system will then let you put that on the student's record and they can still make an EFL gain. So the key here is that where you kind of want to be sure of using alternate placement though is and in Claudia's example, that's fine, there's no issue, that makes perfect sense. But what you don't want to do is put a lot of students with alternate placement thinking that they're going to earn a certain MSG, and then something happens and you're like, oh gosh, I need to give everybody an NRS assessment, and then you cannot count the hours of instruction between the time that you put alternate placement to the time that you put that first NRS test onto the record. So you're still having to count hours towards the post test from the day that you added the NRS assessment to the student's record, even if they've been in an ABE class, for the last 6 months. So, and all of you are aware of that, the day that the test goes into the system, you need 40 hours or more in the system of instructional time to be able to post it. So just kind of keep that in mind. We don't see this as being like a very heavily used or all of a sudden, across the state, we're going to see most of our students are on an alternate placement. but we do see where there are circumstances and cases where this would be useful, but we don't want you to take this as like a blanket approach to everybody either, because even with the addition of MSG 1D and the change to MSG 1C last year, historically, the state of North Carolina averages about 81% of our statewide MSGs from pre and post testing. With the addition of MSG 1D and the change to 1C last year, 65.4% of our MSGs for the entire state still came from pre and post testing. It is still the bulk of like how students make gains in North Carolina. So we do want you to really think about it before you use it. And Jen and I are happy to talk with anybody about any ideas they may have ahead of, using it, that kind of thing. And we're happy to talk you through that. So several of us had to go to Phoenix. I don't want to go to Phoenix again, but we went to Phoenix for a week in June. It was an experience. And during that week in June in Phoenix, we had the opportunity to work directly with Octane and in small groups with other states to really think about how this could be used, how this should be used, and come up with scenarios and ideas. So we're always happy to talk to you about that. And we have lots and lots of notes of how other states have used it and things like that. Other questions? Let's see. I think I missed your response to Karen about whether a PSC would count if the student is pre-registered but not attended yet in a CU or CE course before attending the BSP course. So the way our system works when it gets to Power BI and the data matching is the CCR enrollment date must occur prior to the CU or CE enrollment date. So if you have a student enroll in CCR on 9/1, their CU or CE date has to be 9/2 or later. If it's like, it's not going to matter if it's a pre-reg or what have you. The system is only looking at dates. So the CCR enrollment date has to be prior to a CE or CU date. Would you recommend that we look up specific students and colleague before giving them an alternate placement? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Laura. If you want to unmute.
I was trying to find the button to see if they've ever taken a curriculum or continuing ed. Because like, I took sewing back in 1996. So that would, if I was that student, it's going to keep us from using that. Is that correct? Because
Well, not sewing, because that's not one of the secondary transition courses.
So it's specific
It has to be the 96-hour, the workforce list that we have. It would have to be one of those program areas, which generally is 96 course hours or greater. And then if you were concerned about college credits in general, institutional effectiveness, or your registrar, whomever at your institution is using the clearinghouse database, they can probably run it through for you too. I would generally think, though, I would hope that students would know if they were ever in like a CCP or an early college or a middle college or a...
You'd be amazed. And again, they don't always tell us. They forget that, they took an automotive class or a welding class, when they were in high school. And we do have a pretty good number here of CCP students, and we have an early college.
Right.
And I know we've had students drop out of the early college and come to us.
Right.
So I guess it's just something to be aware of.
Yeah, y'all may not want to use it for your PSE students because it sounds like that might be more of a roll of the dice. But if you have HSE in Spanish, or if you have a lot of students that come in just needing to complete some of their HSE exams, those may be other areas to look at. Or if you have career pathways, because then you would know, especially career pathways, you know that as long as a student goes through that program, they're going to earn MSG, 3 through 5, whichever you designated on that template.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. The CCR enrollment date. Yes, the CCR enrollment date is going to be your NRS reg date. Other questions? Okay. So
Quick question.
again, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make sure I get this straight. Since we're just finding out kind of about this now, what about students that we already pre-tested, when they came in for orientation, for instance, HSE and Spanish students?
Mhm.
But their
So
tests
you-
have gone in, so
Right, and so they'll have to stay.
okay,
So you cannot start using this today.
right.
You have to have state approval for each area that you want to use it prior to using it. So any student that you've brought in thus far that has a placement test or a pre-test, all that's going to stay in the system. So,
Okay.
So we don't want a bunch of ServiceNow tickets saying, we want to take this test out, or because then that gets into like what we call spurious data. And
Right,
so
right.
I'm not messing with that. So, we just got Octave approval to offer this. We are one of very few states that do have approval to offer this. So just because it came out, in June, we've scrambled to get it in place as fast as we possibly can. We do have approval to use it now. That was a huge effort on Jen's part, going back and forth with Octave. And so while it's in place for the whole program year, we're just now adopting it. So it would have to be once you get the approval back, then you start using it.
So how quickly, if we send the form in, would we get approval?
Right now, I don't have any forms on my desk, and I'm going to guess that Jen doesn't have any on her desk. So we'd probably get it turned around pretty quick. Now, that's not to say that all of a sudden we won't be flooded tomorrow, but between Jen and I, we're pretty quick. We will get it back to you as quickly as we can. But what we don't want to do is, what we don't want to do is give approval to someone where we know it's going to hurt your program.
Right. I was thinking more along the lines of like our HSE and Spanish students, because they're testing, it's like a kind of a crapshoot right now because it's not really geared to them. So
there's not an NRS assessment that's a good indicator.
right, exactly. So just when you said that, it of course made the wheels start spinning. And we have a orientation for HSE and Spanish next week. So that's why I was asking.
So if you submit the form, we look at the form, then your orientation may evolve from whatever NRS assessment you've been giving during that orientation. You could switch it to giving a HiSET or a GED practice exam, making sure that the student's going to score, at that level needed academically. And the good thing about that is, at least with the HiSET and GED Spanish practice test, you have a really good indicator, as to what the student needs academically. Whereas before, with our current NRS assessments, it really was, you were kind of in the dark,
Right.
NRS that did not align. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
For type 1, how recent would the GED ready test need to be? We have talked to students that took one of their own 2 weeks ago. Would this be used, or would a new one be needed?
So
Jen?
just what I'm thinking is GED, so the GED exam, the current version has been in place since 2014. I would think, and we can talk about this offline just if you think we need to, but I would think that anything from the current version of GED would be acceptable. So 2014 and after, the last 10 years.
Yep. And they can access those in GED Manager, can't they, Jen? Yep.
Through their GED account. Yeah, through the student GED account. Mm-hmm. Or I'm sorry, were you referring to this to the students being able? Yes, the student can sign themselves up for that.
Okay.
One thing I will say, just as a logistical point, those are not free. The GED Ready tests do cost money. So I know I am aware that some programs purchase vouchers for GED Ready for students. Others, students will pay for the test, for the practice test themselves. I think it's $6 a section, which is much less expensive than the official test, but that is just a logistical consideration. Students do have to pay to take GED Ready. And then HiSET has both paid and unpaid official practice tests.
And we would accept either of those, right?
I believe so. Jennifer, same thing. HiSET, the HiSET exam actually started in 2014. They haven't done any major reworking of the exam. So I'd say any HiSET practice exam would be acceptable.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions? We got a couple minutes left. Was everybody able to access the slide deck and the revised assessment manual in the chat? I think now that everybody's in, they should be able to. And we'll get those posted to the website too.
Jennifer, it would need to be an official HiSET practice exam. We wouldn't take like a random, I got this out of a Kaplan book. It would need to be one of the official HiSET practice exams.
Okay. All right. Well, we appreciate everybody's time today. We hope that you find this as something that'll hopefully be beneficial for your program and for your students. And if you think of anything afterwards, you're always welcome to send Jen or I an email. But again, we appreciate your time. We have recorded this training, so it will go into the PD archives along with the slide deck from today, and the revised assessment manual will also be posted to the website soon. So with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope that you all stay safe and dry in these coming 2 days with the storm coming. So thanks, y'all.